My name's Charlie Mathews, and I'm here today with Mike Perk. Mike Perk is my mentor, my friend, and we're writing a book together on transformation. Mike is a transformation expert and has mentored leaders, consulted to financial and other large global companies. Mike, welcome. And the first thing I want to ask you is, let's talk, what is transformation? What is this thing, transformation, that we're writing about?
Firstly, I'm going to say good morning to you as well, Charlie. It's always great to catch up and to speak. I love these conversations, and it's so nice to actually be recording a little bit of a backwards and forwards, because we often get caught up in our 5-minute chats around these sort of topics, and then an hour and a half later we're still debating and arguing and learning from each other. So thank you for setting this up, and I'm really looking forward to it. So transformation, what is transformation? Well, maybe I can start by telling a story. As you know, I ran with my business partners a digital marketing agency for many years called Worldwide Creative. And about 5 or 6 years ago, we decided we needed to change. And we shifted from this digital marketing agency to a people-focused digital transformation advisory. My God, what a mouthful. But quite a different organization. At the time, we've become quite disillusioned with the state of the industry. We were no longer adding value in the places we were passionate about. We'd ultimately become execution specialists and not strategists and creative anymore. And there was good reason for that. There were good brand, creative, and strategy people were now on the brand side, the client side. And it just meant that we were becoming those executionists, and the problem was it had impacted the culture within our organization. So a culture of very, collaborative, high level thinking, creativity, had sort of shifted as the industry had shifted and as the work that we had done had shifted. And the energy that we had in our culture was now reflecting that of our clients, and our people were starting to get unhappy. I'll never forget, it was an exit interview with someone that worked for us, a lovely guy, Etienne Mostat, and he, on his leaving interview, said to me that one of the biggest struggles that he was having was with me, and that my frantic energy, my continual sort of anxiety and worrying, which was coming from the clients, was causing him and everyone else to be on edge. And the culture had sort of become a response to that negative energy around us. Because we knew something was wrong, right? We knew something was up, but we didn't necessarily know what it was. So we did a lot of self-reflection. We looked at our purpose, like a lot of organizations do. And on doing that, we realized that it wasn't just about setting a new purpose and getting everyone going. We had to change who we were. So we looked at what we're good at. We looked at technology. We were good at that senior level, strategic thinking, facilitation. And I had an HR and people background, and I felt that I wanted to bring that out more as we took the business forward. So we spent some time communicating with our staff, our teams, and created a shared vision about what this new company could be. And unfortunately, it was going to be big change, right? It was fundamental change. We're going from what was an 80-plus digital agency to a consultancy that would ultimately be 10 or less people. We knew that it would take a time to do, 2 years. And we went through this process, and what was fascinating was the way in which the team came on board. It helped us with the change. People moved off and left, knowing that they weren't necessarily going to be part of that transformation or the end product at the end, but they helped us to get there. I think because we brought them into it. And yeah, I'd say that was our journey of transformation. So when you ask what is transformation, I just want to tell that story because that's one that's poignant to me, and it highlights some of the key stages that happen during transformation. So the first one is there is this unawareness. So something's not right. You can feel it, you can sense it, but you don't necessarily know what it is. So you have to move from that unawareness to an awareness state. Okay, what is the problem? And that takes self-reflection. That takes a a deep confronting of the truth, and then you can move into that awareness stage. But just being aware of the problem doesn't transform you, right? It doesn't take you from A to B. You actually then have to go, well, what do I need to change? What are the new behaviors that I need to exhibit? What are the new things I need to do? So going from unawareness to awareness, and then the third step, you've got to learn new behaviors. And then you've got to practice them until they become routine, until they become habit. And then as that happens, your values will start to change. And only with that are you then going to get the real change. And transformation is not about these small little things. I mean, I consult to a lot of people about digital transformation, and they think that putting just one system in place is going to be a digital transformation. It's not. Transformation by its very nature is a marked change in form. It's not a small change. It's not piecemeal, and it's continuous. I don't know. I mean, we talk about this quite a bit, Charlie. What are your thoughts around that?
Mike, from my perspective, transformation has been very personal. It has been a very personal journey. So in one respect, when I started working, my first work was done on a typewriter. I now consult in a field where there is kind of a lot of technology. I work with artificial intelligence. I work with research on kind of networks and ecosystems. So it has been remarkable to go from an era where work was done on a typewriter to kind of like a kind of the very first connectivity to helping MWeb to launch in South Africa, working at Naspers and being exposed to Tencent, working with Tutuka, which is a global kind of company. But also as a young person, I started out in advertising. And I'm going to tell you two things that I witnessed in a huge, huge agency that I worked for. As a young person, I think I was in my very, very early 20s, that deeply disturbed me. I worked in a masculine-led agency, and it was a white agency in those days. There were Friday night parties at this huge agency. And I remember one of the men coming in, offering everyone cocktail sausages and everything like that. And as a joke, he had his penis on a tray. Yeah, and in a room of like women, and it was just like completely shocking for me. I come from like an all-girls school. I was wrestling with my own sexuality and identity. Yeah, that was the one thing. But the thing that disturbed me more than that, in fact, was on that same night, two men decided to kind of show their bravado by getting out. We were in the Sandton kind of Twin Towers, and we were on the 40th floor or something, and the wind was howling. And there were two men who had gotten extraordinarily drunk, and they got out of the window to show how masculine and brave they were. They had challenged each other to walk on the ledge of the building from their office around the corner, and then get into the bar where everyone was to show them how strong they were as men. And they did that. And I remember them coming in through the window, and they were white and they were shaken and they looked kind of ghostly in a way. Not like the happy, jovial people they had been before. And they had walked through extreme terror. And I wondered why people would do that, to kind of prove things to other people. Yeah. And as I grew up through the Mad Men era, and I got to understand it, because I didn't understand it then. I didn't understand the game or the rules of the game or kind of how things worked. And I had a certain naivete about apartheid. Yeah. So I have come from that, these masculine white-led companies, yeah, to working fully integrated global teams where intelligence is unbridled. And I've come to understand that transformation is inclusion and diversity, and that when everyone sits at the table and has a voice, these kind of manic, scary kind of definitions that we give to success, they can melt away. And that transformation is, in fact, about the meeting of the self and changing those parts of yourself that you do not like. And that in business, we're in a state of business where so much has been done that has been wrong. You know what I mean? That we've hurt the environment, and all of us in our own way have bought things that have been bad for the environment or have hurt something. And we now need to forgive ourselves and go on a massive project of change, a change like we're seeing in America with the Black Lives Matters movement. Yeah, we all need to go deep into ourselves and change the processes, the actions, the personality parts, change everything about ourselves in the way that we do a business. So for me, transformation is a hopeful, beautiful journey into the self in which we become better and more beautiful human beings and open ourselves to others and diversity and to learning, yeah, and forgive ourselves for what we have done.
There is around the world at the moment, there's a heightened awareness for the need to change. You know, I mean, we live in I particularly live in the digital transformation space, and we've been talking about it for years, but it took COVID-19 to really make it happen. There are certain moments in history where there is marked change, marked transformation. You know, we've chatted before about the Black Death and how it killed off serfdom, and depopulation and migration to the cities just caused that serfdom to be killed. But even, I think, coming from the UK, the end of the Second World War, I mean, it brought about social democracy and great reform in the UK. You know, and it's happening again, and it's in response to, you know, the negative consequences of finding out some of these things you're describing, the capitalism, the inequalities that are around the world, this gaps between the haves and the have-nots just growing. It gets too wide, and there are certain moments in history where it gets to a point where we just say enough's enough. But it requires that, not just the reflection, but the action. And I think we're at that tipping point for greater action. Now, that's happening in society, but it's also happening in organizations. I think people are fed up with the way things are going and some of the things you've just described there. So although I said it was continuous, I think you're right. There are these moments, these transformative things that cause us to just tip. And then the greater consciousness comes together to really transform the bigger stuff.
Mike, the one thing we've seen, and we have worked in organizations together, the one thing we do see is that transformation is not about technology. Transformation is about people. And can you speak to kind of change within organizations? How do organizations change? You know, we've all seen that meme, you know, who transformed your company? Was it the CEO, the CIO, or COVID? And if COVID has done one thing, it has kind of almost enforced a massive sea change. How do you start a transformation journey given that it's a complete change in hierarchies and that we're moving from the age of the shareholder to the age of the employee, to the age of the customer, to the age of humans?
I think there's a willingness to move. I wouldn't necessarily say that organizations have got there. And I think that's maybe the starting point. Change is hard, right? It is. It's uncomfortable. I don't know if you've ever, I'm sure you have, but have you ever been in an organization? I often use this example where you're asked just to change desks. Just tell someone you're no longer sitting there. We're moving, we're rearranging the office. You're going to sit over there. Like, oh my God, all hell breaks loose. It's like the world has collapsed, and we're just asking someone to change desks. So the moment you're saying we're going to change the way we are, the way we be, what we do, how we do it, there is that natural aversion to move into that change. We are safe. We don't want to move out of our safe space. But we must remember also that we are highly adaptable people. That great story of Pedro Bacarita. Pedro Bacarita was a Spanish teacher based in New York, and on his way to work one day, he collapsed on the sidewalk, and he had a massive stroke, and it damaged huge parts of his brain, particularly the parts for his motor skills. So he was unable to move, walk, and the doctors and the specialists said, that's it. You're never going to be able to move again, walk again. You're paralyzed. Now, he was fortunate in that his sons were both in medical school at the time, and they didn't accept this diagnosis, this prognosis. And so they took him home and they worked with their dad. They slowly started, firstly got him to crawl and to move, and pads on his arms, and eventually he was sitting up, and eventually got him walking and catching balls. It was phenomenal. And within a year, he was actually back at his school teaching Spanish again, where he stayed until he retired. And what they had found and stepped into was this idea of neuroplasticity, the fact that all these damaged parts of his brain, the working parts of his brain, had taken over the roles that the damaged parts had taken. His brain had reconfigured itself, in essence. That's how adaptable we are. So although change is hard, we know that as human beings, we are adaptable. What we've seen in the research that we've been looking at, we talk more about in our book, is that there are common cultural characteristics within organizations that are helping certain ones to thrive in this VUCA world, and this volatile, uncertain, chaotic, ambiguous world. And that's allowing people to be able to shift and change more quickly. There's higher levels of adaptability, of innovation, of collaboration in those organizations. They have transformative visions, and they've managed to successfully distribute decision making. And the people that work there because they have passion for the work. So they live to work rather than work to live. And that's the sort of the what of the organization of the future, the bit that you were sort of alluding to as to where many organizations want to go. But to come back to the how do they get there? We said that change is hard. I think a lot of organizations really struggle to understand the role of culture. Culture tends to get looked at in organizations as this standalone thing that gets put there alongside finance, alongside HR, alongside whatever those components of the business are. But culture is everything within an organization. It's how we communicate, it's how we behave, it's how we execute, it's how we appoint people, it's why we appoint people, it's our policies, it's our structures. It's all these different things. It's intertwined. I love John Katzenbach's work. He works for, they were bought by PwC, but the Katzenbach Center, and they have a model that looks at 3 key elements to a business. Okay, and these things should be looked at, I believe, in equal status within a business. And the first is the strategy, right? The thing that drives the direction. It's the grounds on which we've all decided how best we're going to compete in the world. The second one is the operating model. So how are we planning to get there? So we've got our strategy, we know the direction, but how are we actually going to get there? What are the things that we need to put in place? What are the relationships, the governance? What's best going to support the kind of activities that will help us achieve that strategy? And finally, and critically, and it's not this side piece, it's a critical part of any organization, is the idea of culture. And culture is how Katzenbach puts it, is it's the motivation that drives and supports those other 2 elements. It's the emotional commitment that people feel or don't feel when a leader describes that strategy. It's the commitment and passion they put and they bring together as people to their roles, to their daily actions, that's going to support that direction. So that's a critical thing. And I think organizations, in order to move forward, need to understand that role that culture plays. So if you're talking about digital transformation, we get caught up in the technology side of it all too often. But you have to understand, if we've got a strategy and operating model that's going to involve more technology, that's going to take us into a different space, that might be new products, we have to look and analyze the culture to say, how can that support that journey? And that's critical. And as we do that, you need to have that self-reflection. So you need to understand that culture in your organization, if you're going to change it, or enhance what you have and key components to help drive that strategy, it's been established over time. And this then starts to lead into some of those problems you were talking about, the hierarchies, the way in which things have always been done here. What you tend to get is a founder started a company and they've got certain assumptions and beliefs, and they behave based on those assumptions and beliefs, and they've gained success based on that. So great, what do? They recruit people that align with those assumptions and beliefs that are going to help achieve the success that they've already achieved by doing it in the same way. And as people become managers, those managers do the same thing, and they hire people. So now you've suddenly got all these people with similar attitudes and beliefs. And what it starts to establish is a particular way of doing things that's then very difficult to get out of. They get that new person with new ideas that comes in. It's like, no, it's not how we do it here. So I think it's important to understand culture. It's important to understand your own culture and to analyze that within an organization. Then understand what parts of those culture needed to drive the organization forward to achieve what it needs to achieve. And more often than not, we're starting to see cultures that are, because of the desire from people coming into the organization, from people who are feeling lost, or that the organization is no longer fulfilling their needs, that desire for change, and there's a misalignment between the individuals within the organization and the way the organization's structured. And you have to address that balance in order to move it forward. So I've rambled a little bit there, which I tend to do. I don't know. Has that answered your question?
There's a lot to unpack there. You started with a story about a man who had a stroke and how his sons catalyzed hope for him, and how he then went on a very hopeful, positive and pragmatic journey. And I love that, because that in part is my story, because I too had a stroke. And there was a stage in my life where I had to crawl on my hands and knees to make it from the bedroom to the bathroom, and had to come back to a world of work. And for the first time had depression, and had to deal with that, And hope is very important to taking one's journey forward, because without hope, there is no reason for the imagination to kind of co-create with you. And then the choice becomes, almost between the grim dark and, like a hope punk. And these concepts of grim dark and hope punk are something that have come to us from culture, our collective culture. And we have said that we are going to call our book Hope Punk, because hope punk is a new kind of movement that is born of a fusion of economical, political and social change, and that hope punk really is about adaptability. And that it is, there was a writer, Alexander Rowland, who, as an antidote to grimdark, which was all these stories about war and violence and death and senseless depravity that featured in the fantasy world, came up with this concept of kind of a hope punkness, and that in the grimdark, in the war, kind of in the polarity, in the Trumpness, in the, in all the aggressiveness that we are seeing today, the COVID, like the hopelessness, that hope punk can be something we can hold on to. And Alexander Rowland, when she defined this, she said that the opposite of grimdark is hope punk. Pass it on. And when she was asked later to kind of explore what that meant, she said that hope punk is a subgenre in literature and a philosophy that says that kindness and softness doesn't equal weakness, and that in a world of brutal cynicism, nihilism, being kind is a political act. It is an act of rebellion. Why is kindness and compassion as a driver for change, and why is hope so important, and particularly within organizations?
I think it's something that we've seen. It was something that sort of, the book as we started to write it was never intended to bring out that idea of hope. It was just something that we saw as we were sort of looking at the different organizations, because it was very digital transformation focused, right? So we were looking at what had they done to change, and the adaptability, the agile ways of working, agility, was coming through, and that's stuff that you would expect to come through. But then there was just this underlying thing that we were noticing in these organizations of hope. Now, I don't want to get all soft about it, because often we go, oh, hope, it's that positive optimism, it's like too soft. It's the idea of hope is punk, it's anti-establishment. You know, this idea of being kind and loving within a workplace, it's like that doesn't happen because of these hierarchies, because of the masculinity that exists within organizations. So that, I think, also sort of spiked our interest. So transformation, or the idea of transformation process, is often driven within organizations by the fear of the unknown. It's from a fear of survival. You know, it's from a place of real worry. What does the future hold? We've got to survive. I don't know how we're gonna do that. And it's in society around us. You know, there's been a real shift in the way in which people view the world, particularly in the last 10, 20 years. I think, you know, the 9/11, when 9/11 happened, a lot of people became fearful. And what we were finding with the organizations that we were looking at was that rather than, it wasn't that they ignored those things. It wasn't that they said those things didn't exist. They were facing the brutal truth, right? So hope was around the need for courage. You know, it demands that we actually confront that dark reality. But then it needs faith of some kind. It needs, if one's going to remain hopeful in the face of bleakness that is around us, we need faith. You need faith, and that could be, it might be faith, religious faith, but it's more in an organization. It's the faith in your people. It's faith in you as an individual, in yourself as a leader. It's the faith in our humanity. You know, so we've got the courage, we've got the faith, we've also got meaning and purpose. And without that meaning and purpose, that hope will not sustain itself. And we saw that as a real key tenet within some of those organizations. And from that stemmed the ability then for them to become more adaptable, to become more agile. You know, and I think it's that ultimately the idea of hope punk is being able to maintain hope over long periods of time. It's accepting the brutal truth. It's finding the courage, the faith, being driven by purpose. But it's then creating that optimistic outlook, that optimistic purpose, and embracing. You said this to me, and it always hit home for me, was embracing our imaginations for reinvention. And those organizations that are becoming future fit, that are setting themselves up to survive for the long term, are finding peace within the grimdark by having this hope and being able to sustain it. That hope punk. That's what it means for me.
I think starting a business by its very nature is a rebellious act of hope, because if you look at the statistics, they say about 97% of all startups fail. Yeah. And so by its very nature, the genesis of any kind of startup is a journey of hope, a journey into that mystery. Will it work? You know, will my customers love me? Will my customers buy? You know, will I be able to, you know, Jack Ma, when he started Alibaba, he gathered a group of his friends into the room and said, you know, don't know the exact words, but I love you. I see this great opportunity. You're all great human beings. Do you believe me? Do you believe in me enough to forgo your jobs and to start this kind of huge e-commerce thing I'm thinking of, you know? And that is a hopeful thing. When Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or whomever started these big corporations that existed now, it was started with hope. And the problem is that as organizations get bigger, they become more complex and they move away from their founding kind of genesis, which is this hopefulness, this listening to everyone, this co-creation, this collaboration, where everyone is so vital to maturing this business. So I feel very much that hope is just kind of a going back to home, and saying, okay, we perhaps are a bit off course. We are not in sync with the environment. We need to change that. If you're McKinsey, you're saying that Black Lives Matter to us, and we're changing the representation of our board. So it is a hopeful kind of returning to kind of the basic kind of things that we need diversity, we need inclusion, and we need a hopeful forward direction in which everyone is a part of the story.
And therein, I mean, you've described that. That's the key problem, right? It's as we grow. And that's where the difficulty around the transformation, the longer a company has been established doing things in a particular way, that hope has sort of disappeared. I told it with my story for our company, and we had got to the point where all of that excitement and energy from when we started we just become part of a machine. Employees felt like a machine. They were clocking in and out. There were set ways of doing things. It was just this hierarchy. However much we said we were a flat organization, we had to scale. And to scale, we put processes in place. It killed adaptability. It killed innovation. And as leaders, they're often blamed for, you're the ones that did this, you're the ones that create that. But many leaders feel stuck in that as well. It's, they suddenly become beholden to a shareholder, the bottom line, and they're feeling that that's no longer aligned with their core values and beliefs. They may want to change, but the structures that they exist within make it extremely, extremely difficult. And then they try to, right? So the next shift is to say, let's talk about purpose. I want to understand our purpose, or let's grow our CSI, or let's empower our employees to increase collaboration. So they start to do these initiatives, but the problem is those initiatives that they do, they're not looking at the fundamental way of who are. They're not looking at their values and their beliefs and the behaviors that unfortunately are driving most of their stuff. So when they start looking at their purpose, eventually plays second fiddle to the bottom line and the chaos, when chaos and complexity and tough decisions need to be made, or they're sat in front of the stakeholder in their shareholding meeting or their board meeting. CSI becomes this cool thing that you've got to get away from your day job and you can give back to other people, as opposed to being everything you do. And the idea of distributing leadership, because in building the servant leadership, ends up falling short when the shit, excuse my French, but the shit really hits the fan. The boss steps in and we get back to this masculine hierarchy. It for me, the big problem is the heart is willing, right? The heart is, we want to do it. We want to do it. But some of the bodies that we've created in these organizations are weak. However much we try, they still live in the pyramid structure. That's not to say there isn't a way forward. And like I say, those organizations that we've seen, those hope-driven ones, they found a way of self-management and replacing that with hierarchical pyramids. They've become this living entity where everyone within those entities has a voice, can change something. They don't need to go and get permission. They can just do it. And I think that's where the love, the kindness, the acceptance, the trust that those organizations, someone like Buurtzorg in the Netherlands, they're a nursing organization that has become a massive part of the healthcare industry in Holland. And they've built out that organization in small little, agile people will tell you it's tribes, right? So it's small little tribes, small little pods where teams of 12, up to 12 people will look after a particular area. Those 12 people, they can pretty much decide on what they want to do to make the people that they're responsible for, the care that they're responsible for, work. And then systems are set up to share knowledge within that. Okay, someone can put an idea forward that can then be looked at by everyone, and everyone can then adopt it. And it's just this fluid organism that's continually changing. It's Frank Lelow's Teal organization. You know about Ken Wilber and the work that he's done, and that idea of removing ego, so that people can bring 100% of themselves to the organization. If you can get to that, that's when, love and kindness and those things, it's natural. It's not something that's forced. And hope can thrive. And hope is driven by this bigger purpose within an organization. And I just love it. And I'm just super excited about it. And I just, like you, we can tell people about this and help organizations to look at their culture and to focus on that and to shift into that space while trying to transform on the doing part of it, the technology and stuff. Man, we can make a difference in this world, and I think that's what excites me about sort of what we're looking at and what we're trying to. We just got to find that nice, simple way of getting that message out there now, so that people can really follow it.
Well, I think the first thing for people to do, and the two constituents that we see that are really, really important, is employees and customers, that your employees and your customers are really kind of everything your business is about. And the big kind of change is to stop focusing on shareholders so much and start focusing and investing in employees, particularly in those industries where that interplay is so kind of important. Yeah, that there's been an abstraction away to the shareholder, that the shareholder is the most. It's nonsense. Your employees are everything in your business. Without them, you're lost.
There's many organizations out there that will say, well, we've always put our customer first. We've always put our employee first. But I would argue that they've, from a customer perspective, they put them first by making sure that they provide them with a product of value. They're not necessarily listening to the customer as much as they should do. They say they look after the employee because we're going to give them a good salary or a good wage, or we'll make sure that they're safe. Well, actually, an employee also wants to be listened to. An employee wants to say in where the business is going. That's the difference, I think, that you're talking about. Now, for me, anyway, it's viewing an employee as not a cog in a machine that we need to keep happy and put them first by keeping them happy. It's an employee that we bring into the business because they can add huge value to the business beyond the role in which we've defined for them. Because they as well are special human beings that can easily see stuff that we might be troubling on that's outside their realm of thinking. Imagine if you could, when we bring an employee into the business, right, we give them a job role and we say, this is what you do. On top of that, and then that maybe then is 20% of their capability is that job role. If they're a very niche specialist, maybe 50% of their capability that they're bringing into the business. But they've got other stuff that they're really good at. We just don't allow them to do it. Bring on top of that a culture that says you need to behave in this particular way. And suddenly that 50 or 20% goes down to 20 or 10% of that human being in that organization. Imagine if you could create an environment that allowed them to bring 100% into that organization. All their quirks, all their weirdness, all their skills, everything. Now that is bringing an employee to the forefront. That is about making sure that you're putting employees first. It's allowing them to bring 100% of themselves into the organization. And man, oh man, what you could do then in terms of a business, if you can put the structures in place that allows that to happen, and we're seeing it in pockets around the world with great organizations, that's when you can start. Transformation actually goes by the wayside at that point. It is just part of who you are. You just evolve. The word transformation never comes up. Change management is never needed because it is just part of the evolution of who you are as a organization. And as human beings, you can just evolve as well within that. It's something special.
the thing is to begin the journey, because there are many, many people who have yet to begin that
Mhm.
journey, and to start having conversations about economic change within your business, to start looking at the hierarchies and seeing how you can change that, how you can get your customers participating in your business. Are you in shareholder discussions with your
Yeah.
employees? If not, what other kind of economic participation is there that you can look at? Have the hard discussions. Don't. When we're talking about adaptability and when we're moving into organizations, what we see is we see so many frictions. Yeah. And really, transformation is about interpersonal relationships and opening up and hearing at times what you don't want to hear as a leader, and not taking it
Yeah.
personally and understanding, oh, well, we're all on a journey together.
As a leader, if you can start to build establish a mindful mindset,
Yeah.
right? Because if we can be mindful, it just helps us to be better sensors. We start to listen. We can see the signals in amongst the noise. It starts to enable a higher level of cognition and awareness.
Mm.
The brain's instinctive response to something like COVID-19, to a crisis, is we kick into survival orientated gear. And ironically, that can sometimes be the most unhelpful thing in the crisis. It actually calls, at a point like that, it calls for greater reflection. It calls for greater learning, greater creativity.
Nothing good it comes out of fight or flight. That is not an imaginative state. Fight or flight is very much a contracted kind of primal state. Yeah. And in the worst situations, we want to engage our highest resources, which is our highest cognition, our imagination. We want to innovate our way
Yeah.
out of problems and into kind of inclusive, diverse solutions where we are creating stories where everyone has a part.
That's where it comes back to purpose and meaning. If you've got that purpose and meaning, you can unlock the creativity. Purpose and meaning, it reduces the cortisol, the stress hormones, which allows us to sort of sat down that fight or flight or freeze sort of motion, and the creativity comes out. As leaders, there are big questions we need to ask in crisis and before we transform. It's like, why are we doing this? What's most important right now? What does success look like? Those big questions can start to, and not just for you as leader, but for your organization. It enables the whole organization to start to make creative choices. And it's something simple that anyone can do, that mindful mindset. Just start there. Don't worry about big change. Oh my God, start getting a strategy document out. Just start to reflect and listen and just take that moment to pause. And from that, you'll start to move forward.
If we can sum up, Mike, what you're saying is that to begin with, be more open, be more inclusive, be mindful. But similarly, remember that the most important people that you're speaking with and that you need to involve in your transformation are your customers and your employees. And then I love the way that you talk about having a picture of potential, which is the beginning of your story, which is about knowing yourself. Who are you? What is your intent? Where are you going? That any transformation begins with this kind of who are we and where are we going? What is our journey and story about? And that's just such a beautiful way to start. And then you include everyone in the story, creating the story, and start the dialogue.
And that story, again, getting back to the idea of hope and purpose, it's not just about the great stuff that we can become. We have to confront the brutal truth as well. It's a great little exercise you can do to say that, because I go to a lot of organizations where you say, okay, what are your values? And they've got them written up on the wall and the behaviors. And it's like trust and collaboration and innovation and love and all of these stuff. And the reality is, when you scratch the surface, that's not really the case. It's what they aspire to. But they'll only ever get there if they can confront the brutal truth of what their values truly are. So a really quick, nice little exercise that organizations can do to find out what their values or leaders, right? What do we spend our time doing? What you spend your time doing is what you value. So, I mean, as a parent, one of the most brutal questions I got asked, and this was a question from a guy called Jeremy Barty. He's a change genius. He's like this bit of a maverick there. He's part of the Tidal Pool group. He asked me a question once, what do you value? And I said, well, no, I value my family. He said, what do you spend your time doing? Well, I spend most of my time working. So he confronted me with the brutal truth was, actually, Mike, you value work. You value work more than you do your family. And I think if an organization can ask the question, what do I spend our time? What do we spend our time doing? If we spend our time, the way in which I talk to my staff, I can't say I love my staff if I shout down at them. You know, I can't say that we bring them into collaboration if I don't ask them, what do you think? And bring on board their ideas and provide them a safe space in which to put forward things in which we can change. It's a great little starting point for that self-reflection.
Thank you, Mark.
But thank you. As always, I just enjoy having these conversations, man. It's just so lovely. And hopefully it means something to someone and can inspire someone.
Good.
I've got to run, but thanks.
Good.